Alright, so this probably looks a little darker than normal, and that's because right before I started this, one of my lights burned out, and I don't have another one. And since this video is already like 2 days late, we're just gonna go for it. So, I suppose it kind of fits the tone anyway. So at least there's that. So, I think it's pretty clear why these two would be put together. I don't think that's worth explaining. But it is one of those cases where they do seem to have more in common than just the fact that they both have Tim Burton's name on them and they're the stop-motion animation. Obviously, there's a very common mistake that a lot of people apparently still don't realize, and that's the fact that Tim Burton actually only directed one of these movies, and in that particular case, it was a co-directing credit. So, but we'll get more into that. Obviously, many things these movies have in common, but most notably, you'll notice they both have a protagonist that basically leads a life where everything he does because it's what's expected of him. So eventually he just takes a walk into the woods and tries to figure it all out for himself, and ultimately finds something that completely turns the world upside down. And he is also given a love interest of sorts that, weirdly enough, can like lose her limbs and somehow put them back on. There's some very specific consistencies here. And the thing about, and there's also, I guess, the fan theory about the whole, I don't know if it's like a legitimate fan theory or just something people like to point out, but the whole idea that some people seem to want to believe that these two and Frankenweenie all have the same connection, where it's the main character, whose name is Victor, starts off with his dog as a child, and then in Corpse Bride, he's an adult, and obviously the dog is dead, which is now Scraps in this case, who's just the bones. And then ultimately, in some other afterlife, I guess, there's Jack Skellington and Zero. And I guess there's a fan theory that these are all the same characters in slightly different worlds. I don't mind, I guess. Like, usually fan theories are, like, really out there and really fucking dumb. But I actually kind of don't mind this one, even though there's so many holes in it. But anyway, let's go into them individually now. We're going to start with The Nightmare Before Christmas, obviously, because topical. And the very first thing you want to point out is this is another one of those movies where actually it's not even like another, it's basically its own thing in this regard, and that is the impact it has had on pop culture ever since it came out 24 years ago. And the thing about that is just Jack Skellington's face in general. It may not always be the best crowds, and some people may take it a bit too seriously or too far, but yes, there are so many, like, you talk merchandising, I would think there has to be more merchandise with Jack Skellington's face on it than most any other character. I mean, there has to be. And I can actually not think of a single product that you probably can't find somewhere with his damn face on it. The movie has just hit in that big a way, particularly a particular crowd. Obviously, he might as well be the fucking poster child for Hot Topic at this point, really. Harley Quinn's probably trying to take that away from him, but I'm sure it's a crown he will always wear. So, when it begins, we have this whole introduction with, this is Halloween, and it takes us from the darkness of the sky or something, and then down into Halloween Town. And when you look at this, even you talk the iconic nature of it, and really this one scene comes to mind because there's just so rarely been an instance where we got such an effective and memorable introduction to a world and the characters within it. Where we see the layout of the entire town and all these different characters that, for most of the movie, are just kind of in the background. They're just the townspeople. But I think, in large part, because of this introduction, we, like, recognize them individually every time they pop back up in the movie. Even if they're just walking in the background, or if they're just doing one small minimal task in the foreground and then they're gone again. Like everything from the vampires to the wolf to the dude with the dripping face, the weird kid that's on the leash. They're all always kind of somewhere, and it actually does feel like this enclosed town that we ultimately get to know in just a little over an hour. And this is a great introduction to all those characters who all kind of get their own individual moment in the song. And so that's I always thought that was a really great way to do this. And like I said, you really rarely see something that makes you remember the characters so well just by the opening scene. Maybe the closest thing is the following year with The Lion King, maybe. But even that didn't feature all the characters like this one does, pretty much. And then going on, you have to look at the production of it as well. The thing about this movie is that, and I'm really frightened to admit this, growing up, this was not really a movie that I was into. When I was a kid, every time I would try to watch it, I found myself getting bored with it. But as I grew, I started to realize the artistry of it, more so than anything else. When you just read up on the production of this, it's like, this is a fucking miracle that this thing exists. And the fact that it was supposed to just be some TV special that they ultimately decided, no, we can get this to feature length. So you have like 100 people working on it, and for every 12 movements that the characters make is like 1 second. And this went on for like 3 years, I think, 3 or 4 years before they completed it. And you just looking at it from that stance alone, you would think just how much this took. But then there's also the kind of drama aspect as well. I'd hate to make him look bad if there's like some misinformation here, but it's to my understanding that obviously Tim Burton is the idea man, of course. And it's to my understanding he got the idea from like seeing Halloween decorations being taken down in stores and being immediately replaced with Christmas decorations, and just how jarring that was. And that's where the idea kind of planted the seed, and then eventually planted itself. And then there is the fact that as the movie went on, obviously the director is Henry Selick, who would go on to do Coraline, among other things. And because Monkey Bone kind of happened, but we like to think of Coraline instead. And this. Because the dude's insanely talented, obviously, so we don't have to hold Monkey Bone over his head for any reason. But the thing about it was, I guess there was a whole dispute about who exactly is going to get credit for this. And like I was saying at the beginning, apparently some people still don't quite know the direction in which to take that. Because, to my understanding, to kind of, like I said, hopefully not bringing Tim Burton too down, it's to my understanding that he eventually started to find the whole making of it tedious, so he kind of distanced his involvement in that, which is kind of a shame when you think about it, because to my understanding that Henry Selick basically, like, lived and breathed making this movie the whole time, and very much earned that singular director credit. But then there was the whole thing, I guess, where also, I guess Burton also had disagreements with Danny Elfman, and that's the reason that Ed Wood, the following year, is one of the only Tim Burton movies in existence that Elfman doesn't score. I think the only other one is Sweeney Todd, for obvious reasons. But, yeah, and then there was the whole thing where there were disagreements. Like, in this particular one, you can take his side, and that was apparently somebody had the idea that Oogie Boogie was actually going to be Dr. Finkelstein in disguise, and that Burton was so pissed off, apparently he, like, legitimately put a hole in the wall. So, it's like, there you can get where he's coming from, because that would have not worked. It really wouldn't have. So, yeah, with all this drama and stuff going on with it as well, it's really amazing that we have what we have. On top of the fact of how long and drawn out the process to make it would have had to have been. And that obviously brought us a lot of... I was talking about Jack Skellington's iconic status. The imagery as well. For instance, The Hill, that unrolls itself and he walks down it is an image that people, yeah, even people that haven't seen this movie, I'm sure can instantly recognize. I don't know how many people are left in the world that haven't seen it, but if you were to explore that, I'm sure you would find people still know exactly what that image is. Whether it's the beginning when it's just him, or whether it's the end when it's coated in ice and it's him and Sally on top of it. Either way, it's something that's implanted in people's minds forever. And just being able to capture that with just one image, let alone the multiple images the movie gives us throughout. Because as we know about the process of the making of it, the movie literally just is a series of images that are all put together. But yeah, even just reaching one is a huge accomplishment, and as I said, this movie does have many of them. And the great thing about how alive the animation is and how detailed it is and how everything, like I was talking about at the beginning, this the whole town, just everything is like life. And then I like that comes through in the voice work as well, that the voice work is just as animated as the world that it's in. It was weird to me to find out that you would never suspect it because of how similar they sound. The fact that Jack's speaking voice and Jack's singing voice are two different people, with Chris Sarandon and obviously Danny Elfman doing the vocals. And Chris Sarandon always stood out to me because you can hardly tell that it's him, really. Despite the fact that I'm sure many horror fanatics would go crazy once they learned that Jack Skellington killed Chucky. So there's that. But then there's also Catherine O'Hara doing Sally. There's William Hickey doing Dr. Finkelstein. There is the guy that played Otho is the mayor. That's kind of the one that's like the most obvious. And a number of I can't remember which ones are which with Lock, Stock, and Barrel, but I know the kid in the devil costume, who I think is Locke, is Paul Rubens. So you'll notice a lot of Burton ground is covered in the voice work also, but the way they were able to bring that to life, and what I specifically like about the fact that Danny Elfman does the vocals for Jack Skellington is the fact that Danny Elfman is such an enormous part of Burton movies. Like when you think of Beetlejuice, or you think of Batman, you think of Pee-wee's Big Adventure or whatever, or even in his later movies that aren't that great, Elfman's score is so recognizable and so incredible, and one of the main aspects of the movie. Still, oh, Jesus Christ. One of the best scores of all time, Edward Scissorhands. Beetlejuice kind of gives it a run for its money, too. The point I'm getting to, is that making him the singing voice of Jack Skellington is basically like Elfman finally getting to be, like, the starring role in one of these, when his music has been so influential in regards to how we see and view Burton's movies. It's just really cool to think that this was kind of his point, to be, like, just the front and center. On top of the fact that the songs are probably easily the most memorable things in the movie, and that's saying something. So, going on that, there is, I just gotta gush about the animation a little bit more, and that's the fact that, just how much of the detail you can see. Like, there's the whole, you can see how, like, how vast it looks, and, like, how it, like, it's like it goes on forever, Halloween Town and the like. But then there's also, like, the really up-close and personal details, like the whole, the fact that there's, like, one or two shots we get really quick of Zero turning just the right way, and we can see that his nose is a jack-o'-lantern, like a really tiny one, and that's why it glows. And then there's the whole thing with, I talked about the guy with the dripping face before, but that's still, just that whole effect just somehow really gets me every time I see it, because it's just so, you get it. The precision of it all, like the, like after Jack gets shot down and his Santa suit is kind of blown apart, when he's singing the song, the way the tears in his suit just move like that is just pure insanity. It's to my understanding, you tend to want to break the illusion, and you look up how it is. Apparently it was something involving wire, like actually within it, or something like that. I don't know. You try to look at it vaguely because you don't want all the magic to be gone. So, there is that. And just tiny little things, kind of like just sometimes it involves kind of just quirks with the characters too. Like I love the character of the mayor and the fact that he's such a drama queen, and that he has faces that actually differentiate which mood he's in. But then there's just the things like when he's writing with a quill pen and then he gets excited about something and he just kind of covers himself in ink by accident. Not even I don't think he even realizes it. Or like the way he goes up the stairs to Jack's house is like the funniest thing in the movie to me. It never. it's just this like 1 second thing, and I'm just done for like 30 seconds. And that's the thing too, is that it can really also be very funny in regards to not just being this great work of artistry and all that, and the way they kind of bring out the horror of some of these. Like the whole, obviously just the contrast in general, like seeing Jack Skellington skipping around, you know, the Christmas town and all that. But stuff like, there's obviously dark humor abound, of course. One thing that always kind of got me was the band. Where the moment when he tries to get them to play Jingle Bells, and it's the most sinister, unintentionally sinister version of Jingle Bells. And also the fact later where we see the contrast of what Jack is trying to do. And we get the whole This Is Halloween opening that ultimately ends in his triumphant reveal when he goes into the fountain covered in flames with the pumpkin head, and then he comes out as Jack Skellington, and they're doing like this shit, and it's just this big gigantic moment. And then he tries to do that again when he becomes Santa Claus, but but then it's like he just kind of rises out of a coffin in the suit, and there's just like one asshole that's like very unceremoniously playing Here Comes Santa Claus on some instrument. And it's like, it's just clearly not the same in this world, but they're trying, and that's the point. Still very funny to me. It is interesting that they did the whole 3D conversion thing. It's my understanding this was like the first time they did, like, it was, I don't know, what was it, like 10, 15 years later or something, they did the 3D conversion thing. And I guess this was like the first stop motion movie to be converted to 3D or something along those lines. And the weird thing about it is the way that so much of it is like coming towards the camera, and they're doing a lot of this. You almost think the movie was made for that. Like it was actually made for 3D. How much they are putting shit in your face. So yeah, that I imagine that would be an interesting way to see it, considering how fucking amazing Coraline looked in 3D. And then I'm having trouble seeing my notes because the fucking lights are out. And the thing, what I really also liked was the whole thing going back to exactly how Burton got the idea. And it's like, that seems to be becoming more and more relevant as it goes. How we make the very drastic transition from Halloween straight to Christmas. It's like everybody's forgetting that Thanksgiving exists. It's almost like they're kind of saying that the way Skellington comes out of Halloween Town and he sees all the doors and like all the holidays. There's like the turkey and the heart and the clover. And we're getting all this, the Easter one. And it's like he's looking at all this, but it's like, fuck them. You know, that's not what's going to get anybody's attention. Is of course the Christmas tree that grabs his attention. And as we see throughout the entire years, it's almost like, yeah, it's almost like Thanksgiving is slowly disappearing. And so that's all, it seems like the whole idea of this movie is like getting closer and closer to being like, yeah, that's what it is, basically. Just that very abrupt transition to where it's almost like Halloween still has time to linger when we're in the Christmas shit now. So that might be why we're getting so many more, they're like really trying to do Christmas-themed horror movies seem to be like making this comeback that they had like back in the 80s on like $50 budgets. And it's like everybody's trying to do that again. So I guess we'll see just how much this goes on. But this movie will also obviously always make us appreciate that in at least a little bit. But they do, regardless of that, they do a really great job of showing the just exactly what that contrast is when we see Jack skipping around singing "What's This" and all that, and how we really get to see. It's weird how this movie that like depicts Halloween in like one of the best ways a movie has. Also has one of the better depictions of the joyousness that Christmas brings to, and how the movie is able to accomplish that from both directions and not be predominantly one over the other. It may be predominantly more Halloween, but I think that's just the fact that the whole basis of it is in Halloween Town. But they do really get the point across for both holidays really well in like a really effective ways, and really kind of show that in their own unique way. So the unique way that Burton once had, that is still very prevalent in these late 80s, early 90s movies that he was making, or took a large part in. And of course, as I said, one of the most memorable things in the movie is probably the songs. That may have a part as to why I didn't appreciate this as much as a kid as well. Because when you're a kid, the songs of a musical aren't exactly the things that stand out to you. You kind of feel like those are the moments that you shouldn't give a fuck. But the thing, and it's amazing too, reading about the fact that Danny Elfman said this was like, writing the songs in this movie is like the easiest job he ever had, because he said he had like such a connection to Jack Skellington's character that the lyrics and the music just came right out of him for this movie, like all of them, just right in quick succession. So that's always been amazing to me, because this is definitely some of his best stuff. Well, in regards to, I guess, lyrics, more so. But there's also, I would say, Kidnap the Santa Claus is probably my personal favorite. So, but most, if not all of them, are great. But I do also like the moments when, I guess it's really only one moment that comes to mind, when it's like everything kind of stops for a second and the movie gets really quiet, because there's just so much going on from the get-go, and like when the hullabaloo is not constant, the songs are constant. But then there's just that one moment, like right in the middle of the movie, where everything just kind of calms down and goes really quiet. It's when everything from when Sally makes her escape out the window and then puts herself back together, and then goes and takes the bottle to Jack and then disappears before he can acknowledge her. I think it might be interrupted by Dr. Finkelstein realizing that she's gone, and he like throws a fit, but it's only for like a second. But for the most part in here, like the music is still there, like she walks by the band. But it just feels like this nice moment where the movie just kind of takes a breather and lets everything happen without dialogue or without song. So I always appreciated that kind of interlude in the middle. And it's a really nice way to show their, like, one of the absolute best ways to show romance in a movie is with no dialogue and no real music or song or anything like that. Just kind of the two of them interacting, and that's when you see the real connections. Regardless of how little screen time they share in this. But we have to get to that romantic ending, because that's how movies end. And speaking of songs also, obviously we have the a Disney trademark in the villain song, with Oogie Boogie's song, where we learn all about him. The thing about Oogie Boogie that's interesting here is he's like the big antagonist of the whole movie, and he's like 90% build up. And then we finally kind of see him, he gets a song, and then the climax happens. And it does pay off, like the lighting is really cool, and the way they're able to just make a dude that's basically just Bugs wearing a bag somehow look visually appealing. His song definitely, and the way he sings, and just the whole setup of it and the way it is, does seem like it's like almost like a precursor to Dr. Facilier's number in The Princess and the Frog. I don't know if that's intentional or not. Surely at least a little bit. On the Princess and the Frog's part. So, yes, I don't really know how long I've talked about this now, but I do think I've made most points clear. This obviously definitely has grown on me over the years, for sure. I used to, like, vastly prefer Corpse Bride, and obviously we're going to go into this, but it's kind of like, things have changed. Things have changed since 2005 when Corpse Bride came out, and I've seen this many more times. I think there was actually one year where I watched this twice in one day. But, I mean, it's so short, that's practically nothing. That's basically 2 hours. So, Yeah, it's definitely really, like, it's almost like it's getting better with age. There are some moments where it's like you can tell that this was kind of like a bit of an early stage for a production this vast using this kind of animation, and it does maybe feel like every now and then there might be like a stilted movement or something. But I mean, overall, it's like, yeah, there's just way too much to love here, and don't let some of the more overzealous fans bring it down for you, because I know that can also tend to happen, especially when a movie has the following that this movie does. But it's nice when you actually see a movie that deserves a following get something that's very enthusiastic in that regard, for better or worse. So, unless I forgot something, we can probably go on to Corpse Bride, which, once again, I saw, at the time I saw this, I still wasn't that big on Nightmare Before Christmas, so I don't know if that played a part in how much I really took to Corpse Bride or not. It's weird to me looking back, but it seems like my thoughts on these movies are like constantly reversed. Not that I'm like really down on Corpse Bride these days, but let's just discuss it and see what happens. So obviously he's very much Burton. We got Burton very much in his Frankenstein phase now, with the whole starting like the Frankenweenie story had obviously been around, but then before it became the movie that we now know it to be from 2012. But he was really back in this territory with sorry, with this story of this is once again, we talked about this when the Willy Wonka video, I think, probably among many others. This is when Depp was like really starting to like really blow up. Like, obviously he had his run in the early 90s, which was fantastic and probably his peak talent-wise. But then in 2003, Pirates came along, and then this is when, like, the Depp and Burton partnership wasn't as exciting as it was back then. But it still had its moments. This was also a time when it started to become popular in animation to make your characters look like the actors. To where somebody anonymously doing a voice to practically no fanfare, but making memorable characters regardless, completely gone out the window by this point. And doing which would become quite normal teaming up of Depp with Helena Bonham Carter, which in this movie is still charming. It had not run its course by this point. And it was still strong 2 years later in Sweeney Todd as well. But before she comes into it, we have Emily Watson's character, where we have how adorable Victor and Victoria. And the interesting direction this movie takes right away is that it sets up the old cliche, which is we have the guy that's not sure if he wants to be in this arranged marriage, and the girl's not sure if she is either. And it's basically so their parents can benefit from it, because their parents are all pieces of shit and greedy. And it's, well, his family, not so much. Hers, absolutely. But the thing is this is basically to make everybody have an advantage. And this is the part where the two come together and they have nothing in common, and they're miserable, they don't even like each other, they're just doing this out of duty. But lo and behold, Victor and Victoria meet, and they actually go well together, and they do instantly like each other, and it's really nice and really sweet and all that. It just happens that Victor here is playing a Johnny Depp character in a Tim Burton movie, so he's going to be he's going to be overly clumsy. If he was human, he would be mugging, I'm sure. And he eventually accidentally sets somebody on fire just trying to light a candle and put wine in a cup. So as I said before, he has to take a breather, go out into the woods, figure out how he's going to do this, because he really does like Victoria, and it would be nice if this actually kind of worked out. But he just can't do it because for some reason he's a clumsy idiot. And ultimately accidentally puts the ring on Emily's corpse. It's so confusing. Helena Bonham Carter's character's name is Emily, but Victoria's actress is Emily Watson. But we'll figure it out. So, eventually... And then, when the movie really kicks into gear, obviously, is when he is taken down into this underworld of the dead. And then we see where, obviously Leica's name is on this movie. But this was before they were kind of like their own, like, they got like their own fucking logo and everything, and they were really brought forth as like this counterpoint to Pixar or whatever. And so you can very much see how they would influence their later movies, like Paranorman, obviously. So it's like we kind of get Frankenweenie and Paranorman all at once here, 7 years before they even came out. And they do obviously mesh together very well, these two things. And because it does very much, regardless of its animation, recreate it's very much like they took the live-action Burton world and were able to make the exact same world in animated form, which is really impressive, too. I mean, I suppose you could just say, well, it's not that impressive, they just made everything fucking gray. But no, everything from the way the characters look and move to the way the buildings look, just everything does have that Burton feel regardless. And you can tell it seemed like he had much more involvement in this than he did in The Nightmare Before Christmas in regards to the actual, like, making of it. So, as this goes on, and also speaking of Burton, this movie does have sporadic laughs. Like, Nightmare Before Christmas is probably funnier, more consistently funny, but Corpse Bride, it doesn't, there's no lack of trying in Corpse Bride, but a lot of it is based on puns. Like, there's the whole, there's when he says to Scraps, who he's just met again in bone form, to play dead. Or when the Peter Lorre worm sees the footprints in the snow of Victor, and he's talking about Victor having cold feet before the wedding. Or when the spider comes down and she says, "Oh, you just got married, did you? I'm a widow myself." And it's like, the movie's full of this. And if you like that, I mean, sure, it's fine. But there's a laugh every now and then in there, like, when what the fuck is his name? Elder Gubnik or something. The skeleton with the really long beard that, like, is basically like Dumbledore here or something. When they're trying to figure out how they're going to get back to the real world, and he does the whole thing where it's like this very dramatic potion, but it ends up just being some drink of his. Laughs like that. It's the Burton point I was gonna make. I got so far off of is, yeah, if you do want to laugh in the movie, the biggest Burton fanatics will probably get a slight chuckle out of the fact that Victoria's dad accidentally calls Victor Vincent. So there's that. But going on also, as far as the music goes, because once again, that's one of the most important things here, we don't quite have the memorable songs that we did in The Nightmare Before Christmas, and I think there's kind of a reason for that. Not that they're not catchy, necessarily, but just the fact that the music is great, as always, because it's Elfman, but the lyrics here are a bit more clunky, I guess would be the word. They don't quite have that clever feel that they did in Nightmare Before Christmas, and they do kind of feel like, some of them feel kind of forced. But some of them do really work. The Remains of the Day number is obviously like the highlight of the whole movie, where, shock surprise, Elfman gets to perform the songs, the music and the vocals as well. Because he is, what's his name, Bone Jangles, the one-eyed skeleton that wears the hat and does the whole musical number, which is fantastic. I stress again, probably the highlight of the movie, this scene. But the thing that I really like about this particular number, like, I guess the whole concept too, but this number in particular really pulls this off. And that is, you look at it, let's get real for a second. The thing about it is, when we go through life, we're basically, obviously the point of life is to postpone death. And the whole thing is, like, we all know that's where we're headed, but life basically is us trying to distract ourselves from that fact and trying to make ourselves happy before we get to that point, or at least busy until we get to that point. Because there's just this real particular, I mean, some people just say, like, well, death is death, whatever, I don't care. But I think a lot of us just really kind of, like, you lay in bed at night and you think about that whole inevitable thing, and it's unnerving, and it's scary, and it's easy to freak you out. But then every now and then there are movies that come along that just kind of really give you this calm feeling about the whole death thing. Like even regardless of what it is, it doesn't really matter because chances are we're not going to know when it happens. But it's nice to have these movies that come in and give us a bit of a calm about that whole scenario. I look to movies like The Green Pastures and Cabin in the Sky and Here Comes Mr. Jordan. Just these depictions of the afterlife that really kind of just give you this light feel about the whole thing and kind of takes away that dread that's all the way at the end of life just a little bit. And this movie can do that in like such a different way than those other movies I mentioned. These movies that have these really soothing depictions of heaven or what exactly happens after or whatever, the different mechanics of it. And this movie just takes that in a very, very dark way, but also so energetic and light about it that it kind of has the same feel of you can see this thing that you're going to spend the rest of your life dreading in such this happy, almost comedic kind of way, particularly in this Remains of the Day numbered, where like we see the disgusting factor of like bones and worms. Like there's that one moment where the Peter Lorre worm looks up at the guy and he's like, "Oh, I know you. I lived in your mother for a while." And it takes this really dark, unsettling material and makes something really kind of, in this particular number, like bright and almost glorious about it. And it's nice, it's comforting, and it's really just gives you a nice feel of relief to see it played out in this way, of that whole thing. And so that's what I think that's why I like this number more than anything else in the movie, is the way it's able to capture that. Or just has a whole humorous approach to the matter of death, like the more unsettling matters, like when we first see the worm and it pops out of her eye and she just giggles and says maggots and does that Helena Bonham Carter laugh of hers. I realize I've just been calling him a worm, but she called him a maggot in that scene. I don't know what it is. He looks like a fucking worm, so that's just what I'm going to keep calling him. And they do play with this too, with some of that humor, like when Victoria figures out what's going on, and both Victor and Emily have shown up and then left, and now her parents think she's crazy, and she says that Victor has married a dead woman. She's a corpse. And the only reaction the mother has to this is, "Victor was in your room? Oh my god, the scandal." So there is something funny, if obvious, to that kind of joke. And they do it again later with that whole nonchalance about it, like when they talk about the fact that Victor is married to a corpse, and I believe it's his own mother that says, "No corpse would marry Victor, come on." So I do like its sense of humor, and I do like the way that it just embraces the whole dreaded feel of the whole death thing and makes this really nice, energetic musical out of it, even if the songs are quite unmemorable and sometimes not always inspired, but it does do its job in that regard, which I do like. And not to mention, if there's one way that Corpse Bride trumps Nightmare Before Christmas, that's obviously the romance. Because I talked about, while the story of Jack and Sally is very sweet, and that last scene between them is a nice, final scene, romance is just Corpse Bride's thing. Like, it's a side thing in Nightmare Before Christmas. Obviously, it's like the point of Corpse Bride, is the whole romance angle. And the fact that we realize there's going to be a conflict here, that it's one thing that he actually does want to marry Victoria, but it's the fact that he also finds himself, there's no, losing situation for him. I mean, it is, because one of them is going to have their heart broken, obviously. It's like the Pearl Wars of Cairo if it wasn't such a downer ending, is what this movie is. And the fact that he actually does have a legitimate choice, because both women are so good for him in different ways, and he does have an attraction to both of them. For Emily's case, obviously, a lot of it is sympathy. And I think that's how we ultimately that's why the ending to this is satisfying and more so bittersweet than we're so heartbroken for Emily that she's going to remain dead while he's going to be with Victoria. it turns out all we really needed was for Emily to have closure. And the way this all plays out, even if he didn't end up with her, there's still something incredibly romantic about her breaking up into a bunch of butterflies and all that shit. Uh, and the fact that he has to make grand gestures for both of them. Like, he has to marry Victoria because he literally has to. But then he realizes that he wants to, so he's doing all that. And all of this, everything he does in the movie is basically to try to get back to her and just the real world. But then there's the whole thing of he becomes so attached to Emily, it's like, wow, I'm just literally going to die for her. Like that's what I'm going to do. I am going to live down here as a dead person because that's what I feel like she deserves. And it's really, it actually gives you that choice where you're not really saying, well, the character should obviously be doing this, and that's what makes romance movies really work, when you kind of take the cliches and kind of turn them just a little bit like that. As if the fact that he's marrying a corpse is not enough of a cliche turn, just ever so slightly. But going on here, also, there is, and it does result in, like, probably the best line in the movie, which is the whole, can a heart, what the fuck is it now? Shit. Can a heart break once it stopped beating? I think that's what it is. Lord Barkis, or whatever his name says it, Richard E. Grant. And yeah, I did want to go into that before we finish, and that is the fact that if there's one thing that I think really holds this movie back, it's that whole Lord Barkis angle. Like I said, I don't mind that Oogie Boogie is like 90% build up because he does have a giant payoff, and he is a very memorable character. Here it's kind of like, once we heard in the song that Emily's old fiance killed her on their wedding night, it just immediately clicks with you because we've already met the dude. And so it's like, it's so obvious that it's like, you spend the whole movie thinking, are we supposed to already know that? Or is it going to be a surprise later? I'm honestly not sure. And then it's like they try to not bring him up again for a while, almost like to try to take the audience away from it so they'll forget, and then it's some surprise when it's revealed, but it's like, we know the whole time. There's like no, you don't bring in a story turn like that and bring in a character like him and say they're not going to connect. And so that's kind of a downer because it just really brings the whole climax to this really obvious place that's really just holding up the interesting story we already had going on of which one is he going to end up with. That is perfectly fine by itself. I do get, I suppose, that it does bring in the dark angle of the movie. Like, if we could, like, this movie honestly could have kept its darkness and still worked as, like, strictly a romance movie without an antagonist. But I guess if you want to tie in her backstory to the rest of it and make it all come whole, and obviously that's ultimately where her closure has to come from, is him going to the other side himself. So I don't know. But it's there. They could have. I understand why it's there. They easily could have done it better, I imagine. Or at the very least made it obvious from the get-go. Like, don't try to hide it. Just let us know from the beginning he's the fucking dude that killed her. And you could probably do more interesting things with that, and probably make him a lot more interesting of a character. But instead he's just here to look very generically sinister until the obvious happens. And then butterflies end. It's just all very abrupt. But, so yes, I don't have anything against Corpse Bride at all. It's just you'll seem to notice that I really, really loved this thing and saw it as something that was so far beyond Nightmare Before Christmas when it initially came out 12 years ago. Probably 12 and a half at this point. I honestly, the feelings have slightly switched, and Corpse Bride does have a lot of problems with it, but I do still like it quite a bit, but not pretty much near as much as I prefer Nightmare now. So, yeah. So, I think that's about it. When you are seeing this, I don't know if the Oscar video will already be out or not, but if it is, then you can go to that as well, or you may be watching that instead of this. I don't fucking know. I don't imagine, actually, that the people watching each of those will cross over anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter. So, it is worth noting, though, come to think of it, that Nightmare Before Christmas did get one Oscar nomination, and that was in visual effects, something that I don't think would happen again until Kubo last year. So that's interesting. That's very unusual for an animated movie, so yes. So there, we've now tied all that shit together. So, yes, I do know what next week's is, and it's... I don't even know how to hint at what it is. It's gonna be... It'll get very bizarre, but also very, very fun and intriguing, so... yeah, and we'll kind of somewhat still be on the Christmas tone, kind of somewhat, so there is that. So until all that other shit, I have no idea what the fuck is coming to theaters anymore. We'll just have to take it week by week through the month, but I'm sure it won't be very exciting, so until all of that,